When I first got this car in the playlist, I wasn't too interested in it, as it's just a big, heavy EV that really wasn't meant to be sporty in any way. But whenever I went to start tuning the Volkswagen ID4, I found a couple things that were pretty interesting, especially being the drift suspension and the Mission R's electric motors, giving it all the way up to 1150 horsepower, which means this thing is an actually pretty interesting drift car whenever you put everything into it. So with that, my name is Zach. Welcome to Clark Creations. Let's get right into it. Here we are, top of the mountain again. As we run down the mountain, I'm going to talk about a lot of the pros of this car, and we'll talk about some of the cons in just a few minutes. But immediately to start off, I don't know why Horizon has let us do this with all the EVs, but this thing's some mean burnout to begin with. So, easily one of my favorite pieces to begin with. But, yeah, this car has a lot of pros to it for a car that, to begin with, I just didn't expect. This is a pretty simple EV. Really not a lot to this car, really. It's just some little, I say little, I keep using the term little. This is a big vehicle. It is heavy, and it is a 4 doors, first off. It's honestly, as big as SUVs have gotten in the US, if you live in the US, this is actually mid-size, which is a horrible thing to hear, as we have giant Suburbans and Expedition, stuff like that in today's market. But this is a big car for Horizon. It's a heavy car for Horizon, but that also means it's a little bit more interesting for drifting. This thing, you can actually flick pretty hard, and it'll take it. I've done a couple backwards entries by accident because of this. And I mean, even now you see it's more nimble than I thought it would be for such a heavy vehicle. Of course, this is all-wheel drive. I normally snow tire all-wheel drive drift everything that I can that makes sense to do it with, and this is no exception. It does it damn well too. It's nowhere near the highest scoring drift car I have, but it's one of the most fun there are. But to get a little bit more into our technical specs with this car, like I said in the intro, 1150 horsepower, all-wheel drive, electric motor. But sadly, one of the issues of it being electric, and I guess it's more of a manufacturer thing, is that it's a single gear, it's direct drive. So you end up with only one, there's just not a bunch of tuning for the transmission. Luckily, with it being electric, I don't know if you'd say spool, but whatever it is, the RPM, I guess, stays pretty high the whole time you're drifting, and your wheel speed stays about the same. I lost that entirely, but yeah, it's a little weird to begin with, having to work with a single gear and just deciding where the sweet spot is, but I think I've pretty well found it, as this now has a top speed of about 125, and this is one of those vehicles, yes, I'm sharing my tune, but it's one of those, it may just be better for you to tune it yourself to find where you like the transmission, and maybe a little bit of suspension too, as I'm still not super happy with it, but it's to the point that I reliably can get good scores. We're close to 1 million coming down the mountain, which is very good. See, that's where I've over-rotated, and I just couldn't grab it back. That's one of the things, this car does not grab very well. But, there it is again. Low speed, and it just will not correct. But we're at over 1 million points down the mountain, which is very good. It looks like we're going to be right at... Am I getting 1.1? Yes, I am. Okay. Yeah, not bad. As I said, this is a fun little car. And, it reminds me a lot of one of the other crazy electric cars that you can get in this game. It's the Mach-E 1400, the build that Von Gittin Jr. and Ford did together for a crazy sort of all-wheel drive drift SUV. And this feels very much the same, with just a couple differences being that has a crazy body kit. This is actually completely stock body. Personally, I thought the Forza Aero looked so ugly on this car that I was not going to waste my time putting it on it. And so, this is where we are. We are stock body. Of course, I had to throw some Turbo Max on there. I love the rim. And Other than that, it's just a paint job. Like I said, just over and over again, it's a heavy car, but that's fine. It does what it wants to, and so long as you stay where it wants to, it does it great. As you saw at the very end of this little run, going down the mountain, not back up there, of course, you can over-rotate, and it is kind of tough to control it once you over-rotate, as the wheel speed gets pretty low too, because again, single gear. So long as you're mindful of that, this is a fun little car, and it does a lot of what you want. I keep calling it little, it's a huge SUV. So with that, I think we are going to go ahead and hop into my next section, which is going to be some of the negative parts of this car, as we're going through a different drift zone that will really point out some of the negatives this car has. Alright, let's talk about some of the negatives of this car. So, a lot of the negatives come down to the fact that this is an electric SUV. Very heavy car. And so it leads to some weird situations where you just can't really flick it too hard, or you're just going to over-rotate. And it also means that with it being an EV, as 1 gear, this is incredibly annoying, as depending on the vehicle is whether or not you have multiple gears. This thing only having a single gear means situations like this, and like the previous turn, where it's really tight, this car just doesn't act very well. It's a situation where you're just so out of the optimal range for it that it just starts to, the wheels get too much speed, and it's really tough to actually finish the drift. Another thing, I have no ability to tune the aero of the car. Not that usually it's just to get the aero as low as possible for the least grip, but sometimes I add a bit here and there based off of the car. And with that, you know, it's normally not an issue. But with something like this, it just has the ugly, atrocious Forza aero to begin with, and I have no interest in using the Forza aero like that. So, that's one of the challenges of this car because of it. Again, weight makes tuning this thing pretty weird too. I'm not going to show exactly how I tune that. I may show it in a future video, but it's kind of weird trying to get the suspension super happy. I actually had it a little too loose to begin with. I was trying to keep it really... I was tuning like I normally do, to be honest. I didn't really take into consideration just how heavy this thing was to begin with. And so, with it being as heavy as it is, I had to do some weird things to the tune to actually get it where I was happy. And is kind of the issue with the over-rotation, is that like going too much further with my suspension and tightening it up more makes it to where it just doesn't throw very well. It's tough to actually get it back sideways. So I end up with either too much rotation or nowhere near enough to make the drifting uncomfortable. This is more the issue with the single gear. That wasn't too bad. I handled that okay. But as you can see here, I think it flicks okay. It's not horrible to control. It just, you really have to go in and think, and you can't overcommit or you end up like this. And then depending on the drift zone, and just super off line where I want to be. So it's definitely one of those vehicles. This is a fun car, but is nowhere near my most competitive car. As you've seen in my other video where I did Valkyrie, and here soon with a couple other cars I'm going to do, I can get a lot more angle out of these cars at times, but this car is very picky about whether or not it wants to give me angle. See, like here, actually not that bad. It held its angle pretty well. I had to hit that Bronco. But depending on the corner, like here, it's kind of fighting me. I'm going to try and throw it pretty hard into this corner. And then I over-rotated. It's just one of those, this is going to be a weird car, just based off of just how this car is generally. Big, heavy EV. Which, it's not to say that EVs don't have their pros. The instant torque makes this such a fun car. 1150 horsepower at any time that you want, it'll pick up like crazy. is really fun. I just wish I had a couple gears. I wish I could put a dog box in, to be honest. That 4-speed, I think, would be more than enough for me to do whatever the hell I wanted with this car. Or even a 2-speed, like the I think the Taycan? Yeah. Pretty sure it's the electric Porsche is based off of the e-tron. Or one of those based off of the other. I'm not sure which actually came first. But it has a 2-speed. And that 2-speed is enough to go and do enough tuning that in really low speed you can choose to go down. Whereas with this car, it's only one, and even I'll go and just try to keep it somewhat straight for a minute. And you'll see I've actually capped this thing out at about 130, just so I was in my optimal range for drifting. I'm way oversped there. But I mean, my optimal speed is anywhere from 70 to 100 when I'm drifting. Sometimes you'll drop down to like 60, 50, that's normal. But this car is its happiest in the like that sort of 60 to 100 range. Way too much speed through there. Again, as you can see, you can carry too much, and there's just nothing you can do about it. And I think it has to come down to the fact it's a big SUV more than anything. But I mean, it's doing okay. It yeah, I mean, it's not a huge list of cons, but it's definitely ones to keep it from being like my favorite drift car or something like that, where I can just pick it up and I'm gonna throw down the most points I've ever thrown. And with that, I think I'm gonna wrap it up. All right, that was a Volkswagen ID4. Pretty fun, pretty big, pretty heavy, and there is some challenges around working with an electric SUV, but honestly, pretty fun, and it is pretty reminiscent of that Mach-E 1400, especially if we were given some of the more tuning options that some other cars have. Think like the Big Country Labs spoilers and a more interesting body kit. It really could become one of those fun vehicles like the 1400. But as it stands now, things like the single gear for the entire transmission and the atrocious body kit that Forza has for all their cars, like by default, it makes this car relegated to just fun. It does pretty well. As you saw, I threw down 1.1 down the mountain while I was talking to you all. But it also has over-rotation issues and an inability to kind of correct itself whenever it's going really far. And with that, I'm going to drop the tune code again, as always. It'll be right over there, sorry. And try it out yourself. Let me know if you have some of the same issues with it, or if you like it more than I do, even. And with that, thank you all for watching. Have a good one.